the update that we got yesterday, which came in the form of what we already knew, is that Jaylen Brown has been dealing with a knee injury. And now we got some reporting here from Ramona Shelbourne. I'll read you the opening paragraph of the article that she released yesterday. Celtics all-star forward Jaylen Brown received pain management injections in his troublesome right knee this week in an effort to promote healing before Boston begins its title defense, league sources told ESPN. She does go on to say Brown is expected to be ready for the start of the Celtics' first-round playoff series, which is going to be either April 19th or 20th, which we now know, versus the Hawks or Magic. So we'll have some coverage for you once we know who the actual opponent is for the Celtics here coming up for next weekend. But Greg, this is something we already knew, but it doesn't feel good hearing about injections going into Jaylen Brown's knee, where as early as a few days ago, he was still trying to scratch and claw his way by playing 20 minutes a game to a 65 game limit that he was never going to make all NBA third team. So, you mentioned it in the second half of this podcast with Tim, and we kind of gloss over, we don't go deep into it, but we're like, hey, really the only concern I have for the Celtics is Jaylen Brown's knee. And then we get this information. So I'm going to assume it doesn't feel great, but you're not surprised.
No, not at all. I'm not surprised. I mean, we've been talking about this for a month. Like whenever we tune in to watch the Celtics, Jaylen Brown has not looked good. And the whole idea that he was trying to figure out how to play with the knee and he was saying he wasn't trying to make 65 games, that was kind of bullshit, in my opinion. Maybe that
no, it's 100%. Like they're not going to say it, but it was 100% bullshit.
Yeah. So I mean, when KP, shout out to KP, because he was really seemingly the guy that talked some sense into Jaylen with his post game comments, and they're best buddies. So I wonder if they had like a heart to heart conversation where, with Jaylen, it would have been extra embarrassing for him to play 20 minutes a game the last week and then end up not making third team All NBA. So at least now he has like a built-in excuse as to why he didn't make third team All NBA. It's like, oh, I didn't hit the 65 games,
That's what I've been thinking for 2 weeks is like,
yeah.
You realize you just have a built-in excuse of like, well, if I was healthy and just got to the 65, it's like, it's going to be way worse that you did all this to get to 65. And there's so many guys that are ineligible from
Right.
Luka and Wemby. The list goes on. And B didn't play all year, basically. And it's like, and then you didn't make it. Like, that's gonna feel a lot worse. Now at least it's just like we can look back at the kind of that box score check. Well, he only played 63, even though we know the truth.
Yeah. And it's just like a little frustrating, like with Jaylen Brown's past, because I feel like he hasn't necessarily presented himself as like a selfish individual. He's kind of a guy that puts the team ahead of himself, in my opinion, the way that I've kind of watched him navigate throughout the years. Obviously, he's an individual and he expresses himself, but his actions on the court, I feel like, have always been for the better of the team. And this was just like not a good look for Jaylen the last month of the season. And it's great that he's, taking care of the knee at this point. You just wish he had done this 2 weeks ago and really figured out a way to get this knee as close to 100% as possible. But it's a concern, man, going into the playoffs. Like if Jaylen is not 100%, I think the Celtics' chances of actually making it to the finals dip pretty drastically.
Yeah, I mean, they have to. I mean, that's the biggest difference between this year and last year is the room for error is just less. And even though we, I think when we get into this in the second half of the podcast, like every matchup in the East, I feel pretty good about the Celtics. I mean, I think certainly the Cavs, if you're taking an injured Jaylen Brown, have closed the gap considerably, right? Like that, that maybe becomes an even matchup at that point, right? If you're having a limited or maybe at that point 3 rounds in, you might have a non-existent Jaylen Brown. We'll have to see, how that plays out. But even a team like the Knicks, which I still would not, I think it's still a bad matchup for the Knicks, even without Jaylen Brown. But now you don't have to have the same, hey, who are Mikal and OG going to guard? It's like, no, it's very clear OG's guarding Tatum, and now we don't have to worry about, Mikal not being able to guard either of the Jays if one of them's not there, right? That takes that part out of the equation.
You put him on Derek White, and that's probably a real problem for Derek White.
Exactly. That becomes more effective now. And so it does open up its own Pandora's box of issues. And it's going to be interesting to see how the Celtics address this. And this is why a couple episodes ago we got into, how can Jaylen be effective without his athleticism? Because that's where it's going to be affected the most, right? Like we talked about kind of the defensive back comparison of defensively, it's going to be tough with a bad knee to be able to be the physical Jaylen Brown that he wants to be and that we want him to be as fans.
Yeah.
And then offensively, he's just going to kind of have to pick and choose. We're not going to see him dunking on anybody, I don't think, but we're going to have to pick and choose and see, how his skills and in some select moments of burst potentially can be effective. And that's going to be a really tough balance. And Greg, I don't know. Do you know exactly when this injury feels like it happened? I haven't seen like a line in the sand of when this injury.
Yeah, I don't know that it was necessarily like any blunt force trauma to the knee or
Mm-hmm.
anything like that, but a bone bruise does sound like that would happen because of impact directly to the knee, right? But
Right.
then he's got the posterior impingement in his behind his knee, which I don't really understand how that relates to the bone bruise. Is that the same injury? Did it happen on the same play? I'm not really sure, but
Right.
reading the reporting, it seems like it's been bothering him since around the All-Star break. So that
So the
dates
one
back
thing
couple months.
that's quite a bit. So the one thing that I did notice, and I forget, someone wrote this somewhere, I didn't discover necessarily on my own, is if you look at so the OKC game on March 12th was the last time he played over 30 minutes. Everything since then has been, I think, roughly about 28, 29 minutes and below, but he hasn't cracked over 30 minutes. So using that as kind of a line, which I don't know if that's the game, right, where something happened, but just seeing the decrease in minutes, and part of that's the competition the Celtics were playing in some of those games. But I was just kind of looking at some of the games leading up to that, and you look at the Lakers game, which was 2 games before OKC, and Cleveland, which was a few before. Like, those were the 2 best I've seen Jaylen look all year. Were games that were not that far apart from, if that is potentially kind of the line of where the knee started to really get worse. Like that Cleveland game where the Celtics did end up losing, but had that big lead. Like, that was an amazing Jaylen game. And then so was the Lakers game, in which the Celtics were able to win that one, 111 to 101. And in each of those, he plays 34 minutes. In the Cleveland game, had a little bit of foul trouble, but still played amazing.
Right. Yeah,
and then the Laker game played 42 minutes, right? Like, those were 2 games that I looked at and I was like, all right, now we might be able to have a conversation about Jaylen Brown getting back into this all NBA conversation. And of course, that's where the dip really
steep decline in
Yeah.
minutes and production. Yeah, so you wonder if like maybe he re-aggravated it in one of those 2 games or in that OKC game, because the OKC game was right after those 2 games, and we were like, oh, Jaylen's playing his best basketball of the year right now, and then he has his worst game of the year, arguably, against OKC, and since then hasn't looked like himself. He had the one game, maybe against Chicago, I think it was, where he had over 30 points. We had that one game where that kid in the chat was talking about how like Jaylen was the
Phoenix.
best player.
Yeah, it was Phoenix. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. He was like, Jaylen had the most points. He was the best player on the court. It's like, did you watch the game, man? Or are you just reading the box scores? Because Jaylen doesn't look good. And then, tough look for that kid dropping comments in the chat after the 2 weeks after. I've been thinking about that a lot, Will. I've been like, man, like that kid's gonna feel
stewing on you.
That kid's gonna feel pretty dumb with all these reports that have come out about JB and his knee. So victory lap for us on that one. Yeah, but it's tough, man. It's tough that Jaylen's not going into this postseason healthy, because coming into this season, coming off of the Finals MVP, not playing for Team USA over the summertime, you were hoping that maybe this would be a Jaylen Brown kind of put my stamp, I'm in my prime year. And it just didn't happen. He hasn't been healthy. He's missed a significant amount of games. Even early in the season, he was missing some games with some nagging injuries. And you hope at some point in these playoffs, Jaylen can get to like 90%. And, where either on offense or on defense, you can get close to 100% of Jaylen Brown. We're probably not going to see the 2-way monster that we saw throughout the playoffs last year, which is concerning, man, because Jaylen was the Finals MVP. He was the Eastern Conference Finals MVP. Jaylen was awesome in last year's playoffs, and the Celtics don't win the championship without Jaylen Brown being as great as he was. So it's going to be tough going into these playoffs without him.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot more on Jason Tatum's shoulders, and we're gonna see.
He's ready for it, though.
I think he is too, and that's why I'm not. I mean, like, to your point, this is going to be tougher. I think it changes the percentages of how confident you feel, but I think Jason Tatum is a different type of safety net than if this were to have happened last year. And obviously, KP, at least for right now, is playing some of his best basketball in the Celtic uniform as well. So that helps, and that's why you have that level of high-end depth. But